Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the moment nobody prepares you for. Not the breakup, not the fight, not the last message. I'm talking about the silence that comes after, when both of you go no contact. When you and an avoidant both go no contact, it feels at first like the story just died, like someone slammed a door, turned off the lights, and left you alone in a room with your thoughts. But the truth is, that's not where the story ends. That's where the real story secretly begins, because as long as you were chasing and they were running, everything was about the dynamic between you, not the reality inside each of you. You were focused on their moods, their replies, their distance, their crumbs of affection, and they were focused on managing their discomfort, protecting their space, and staying one step out of any emotional demand that felt too big. So nobody was really facing themselves. You were both just reacting, you to abandonment, them to engulfment. When you both stop, when neither of you sends that just checking in text, when you don't break and they don't reach, the nervous system drama has nowhere else to go but inward, and that's where things get real. At first, this shift feels like hell for you, because the silence echoes all your biggest fears. It's over. I meant nothing. If they cared, they'd reach out. If I was lovable, this wouldn't be happening. Your brain wants you back in motion, wants you to do something, say something, fix something, because doing was how you coped. Chasing wasn't just about them. It was your way of avoiding your own pain, your way of saying, if I can keep this connection alive, I don't have to sit alone with myself and feel what this really did to me. So when you go no contact too, you pull the plug on your favorite numbing strategy. That's why it feels unbearable. But if you stay with that discomfort, something powerful starts to happen. You begin to separate your worth from their response. You start to see that your anxiety, your obsessing, your over-giving were not proof that they were the one. They were proof that an old wound in you got activated and tried to solve itself through that person. On their side, the shift looks different, but serves the same purpose. When you were chasing, they didn't have to examine anything. They could let you carry the emotional load, play the role of the overwhelmed one who just needs space, and never ask, why does intimacy scare me this much? Why do I keep hurting people who get close? Why do I need someone to love me while I push them away? As long as you kept reaching out, their story stayed intact. I'm not the problem. Other people are just too needy. When you stop reaching, when you don't break the silence, the mirror flips. Now they sit with their own emptiness, their own loneliness, without your constant emotional labor cushioning it. For the first time, the question becomes, if I didn't want them, why does it feel like something is missing now that they're really gone? So the story doesn't stop. It shifts from, will they text me, to, who am I without this pattern? On your side, you start to see the ways you abandoned yourself to avoid being abandoned by them. The times you felt that knot in your stomach but stayed. The times you heard, I don't know what I want, and answered with, it's okay, I'll wait. The times you shrank your needs to keep them comfortable. In the quiet, you get a chance to ask, why was I willing to do that? Where did I learn that love means chasing, proving, performing? Those aren't questions you can ask while you're still monitoring their last scene and rewriting texts 10 times. You can only ask them in the stillness. That's the part of the story where your healing begins, not because they changed, but because you finally turned towards yourself. And whether they ever admit it or not, that silence forces them into a similar confrontation. Some avoidance will double down on distraction, but even then, the absence of you is a data point they can't erase. They notice nobody holds space for them quite like you did. They notice the new person doesn't magically fix the old fears. They notice that wherever they go, there they are, the same shutdowns, the same walls, the same urge to run. That realization is their turning point if they are ever going to grow. Not your essays, not your explanations, not your pleas, but the moment they feel the consequence of their patterns without you cushioning it. So when you both go no contact, don't tell yourself nothing is happening. A lot is happening. The chase has stopped, but the truth has started. You are finally in a position to heal the part of you that thought you had to earn love and they are finally in a position to see that they keep destroying the safety they secretly crave. What happens next, whether you ever reconnect, whether they ever grow, is secondary to this deeper reality. The dynamic no longer owns you. The story has left the battlefield between you and moved into the only place it was ever meant to be resolved inside each of you. One choice, one boundary, one honest look in the mirror at a time. The first stage of no contact feels like absolute chaos because your body thinks it's losing oxygen, not a person. You don't just miss their texts, you miss the pattern, the constant checking, the tiny hits of dopamine when they finally replied. The familiar anxiety that, as twisted as it sounds, became your normal. So when it suddenly stops, your nervous system goes into withdrawal. Your mind races with questions. Are they thinking about me? Do they miss me? Are they relieved? Are they already with someone else? You pick up your phone, put it down, pick it up again. You rehearse messages in your head you never send. You wonder if you're being too dramatic, if no contact is a mistake, if you should just break it once to feel that rush of relief that comes from seeing their name light up your screen. And in those first days, maybe weeks, no contact doesn't feel like a boundary at all. It feels like torture. It feels like a game you're losing. It feels like you're punishing yourself for loving someone too much. Your brain keeps whispering. If you really loved them, you wouldn't stay silent. If they really loved you, they'd have reached out by now. And it is so tempting to turn no contact into a strategy, a script, a manipulation. If I don't message, maybe they'll panic, maybe they'll come running back, maybe this is the thing that finally wakes them up and makes them change. And as long as that's the secret purpose, the chaos stays, because your peace is still dependent on what they do next. But stay with it long enough, and something deeper starts to crack open, slowly, in tiny moments you probably won't notice at first, like the first morning you wake up and realize you didn't check your phone in a panic in the first 30 seconds, or the first afternoon you get through without stalking their socials, or the first time you laugh with someone and catch yourself thinking, for a few minutes, I wasn't thinking about them. Those are the little flickers of clarity trying to come online. The truth is, no contact isn't working on them. It's working on you. All of that obsessive energy that used to go outward toward decoding their behavior, trying to anticipate their moods, drafting the perfect text to keep them close, has nowhere to go now. So it starts turning back inward. And at first that feels awful, because now you're left alone with the parts of you that you use this relationship to avoid. The part that feels unlovable, the part that feels abandoned, the part that thinks, I only matter when I'm chosen. But as that dust settles, something powerful happens. You stop obsessing about whether no contact is working on them and start noticing how it's working on you. The more days pass, the more you start to see the old dynamic for what it really was, not just a romance, but a loop. You remember the times you felt physically sick waiting for a reply, the way your heart dropped when they pulled away after a moment of closeness, the way you apologized just to calm them down, even when you weren't wrong. And it hits you that this wasn't love that simply didn't work out. This was a nervous system pattern that was draining the life out of you. In that clarity, no contact stops feeling like a trick and starts feeling like a line in the sand. You begin to understand that you're not just not texting them. You are refusing to put your body back into a war zone and call it chemistry. The silence becomes less about, will they notice I'm gone? And more about, I'm noticing I'm still here. You realize that every day you don't break it, you're not actually choosing distance from them. You're choosing closeness with yourself. That's the moment no contact shifts from tactic to boundary. A tactic says, I'm doing this so they change. A boundary says, I'm doing this because I've changed. A tactic has an invisible countdown clock in your head. If they don't come back by this date, I'll break and reach out. A boundary removes the deadline. Because it's not about a reaction, it's about a standard. You start to feel the difference between the you who used to send one more message just to feel temporarily relieved, and the you who now says, I can tolerate this discomfort if it means I stop betraying myself. Clarity is not that you no longer love them. Clarity is that you finally see the cost of loving them in that old way. Clarity is recognizing that no contact is not a punishment. It's a pause, not a manipulation, a mercy for your own heart, for your own nervous system, for the part of you that has spent years living in fight or flight and calling that being in love. And as that clarity deepens, you stop asking, is no contact the right move if they come back? And you start asking, is breaking no contact the right move for who I'm becoming? And that, right there, is when the power quietly shifts back into your hands, not because you won or they lost, but because you finally understood that the real purpose of this silence was never to bring them closer to you. It was to bring you home to yourself. On their side, the story starts in a way that feels brutal to you, because while you are shaking in the first days of no contact, they often feel something that looks like relief. They suddenly have space, no unread paragraphs, no emotional conversations hanging over their head, no sense that they're failing someone, and their nervous system relaxes for the first time in a long time. They tell themselves, this is better, I can breathe, I needed this. And if you could see that part, it would crush you. You'd think, wow, I meant nothing, they're happy I'm gone. But you're only seeing the first chapter, not the whole story, because with avoidance, relief is the first wave, realization is the second, and the second always comes later. At the beginning, they lean hard on their favorite beliefs, the ones that have protected them for years. They say things like, we weren't compatible. They were too emotional. I'm just not built for relationships right now. They might even talk to friends and casually justify it. It was too intense. I need to focus on me. And they really believe it in that moment, because in the short term, distance lowers their anxiety. The pressure is gone. And their nervous system equates that relief with, I made the right choice. But what they're really feeling is the absence of conflict, not the absence of you. Underneath that relief, there's an assumption running quietly in the background, the same one that has fueled many of their past relationships, the assumption that you are still there, emotionally, that if they ever wanted to come back, you'd answer, that if they needed comfort, you'd pick up, that if they felt lonely, they could send a hey, and you'd come alive. That illusion is like a safety net their ego rests on. I don't need closeness right now, but it's there if I want it. And as long as you kept reaching out in the past, that illusion never got challenged. Your texts, your check-ins, are you okay? Messages kept confirming their story. See, I can take space and they don't go anywhere. I can pull back and they still stay. This must mean I'm not really doing anything wrong. So when you also go no contact, at first they don't notice the depth of that shift. They just enjoy the calm. But time is what changes the flavor of their experience. Days pass, then weeks, and the silence that first felt like freedom starts to feel like emptiness, because they expected your pattern to stay the same even after they left. They expected at least one more message, one more attempt, one more emotional lifeline from you. And when it doesn't come, there is a subtle moment where the ground inside them moves. They might not even admit it, but an old certainty cracks, the certainty that you would always be there waiting. And that crack is where realization begins. They start checking your profile, not full-blown obsession at first, just quick glances, late-night scrolls, just curious. They tell themselves they notice you haven't reached out. They notice your life is still going. Maybe they see you smiling with friends, posting new projects, maybe even just being quietly consistent with yourself. And though they might roll their eyes or tell themselves stories about it, oh look, they're pretending to be fine. Their nervous system is registering something new. I am not the center of their world anymore. This is uncomfortable for them in a way they're not used to owning, because their whole avoidance strategy was built on the belief that they could opt in and out of intimacy without truly losing it. That connection was a tap they could turn on when they wanted warmth and off when they wanted space. Your silence proves that tap was never theirs to control, and that's where the second wave hits, realization, not always as a poetic epiphany, often as a restless, irritable energy they can't quite place. They feel a tug when they see your name, a sting when something reminds them of you, a hollowness when they realize they don't have that safe person to vent to anymore. They might try to drown it out with work, distraction, dating apps, other people. But in quiet moments, especially at night, the illusion that you'd always be available starts to feel childish, and a deeper truth creeps in. I might have pushed away someone who actually cared, and they're not circling back this time. Now, it's crucial you understand realization does not automatically equal action. Some avoidants will feel all of this and still stay frozen, prideful, or too scared to reach out. Some will reach out but not be ready to truly change. Others will let that crack open into real self-reflection and growth. You cannot control which one they choose, but your silence is what gave them the chance to even face that choice. Your no contact took away their favorite reassurance. The version of you who is always emotionally on call, and without that, they are forced to confront their own patterns instead of blaming yours. Relief came first because distance calms a scared system, but realization comes later because losing real access to you confronts them with a reality they never wanted to face, that your love was not limitless, that your patience had an end, and that their illusion of "you'll always be there" was exactly that, an illusion. Before mutual no contact, whether you realized it or not, the relationship ran on a script. There was a chaser, and there was the one being chased. There was a person on the pedestal, and a person on the floor looking up. There was someone whose attention felt like oxygen, and someone who controlled the oxygen tank. And in this story, you know exactly which role you played. You were the one refreshing chats, rereading messages, drafting paragraphs, apologizing first, trying to understand their side, explaining your feelings in careful detail, hoping they'd finally get it, hoping they'd finally choose you in the way you were choosing them. And every time they pulled away, it reinforced an invisible hierarchy inside you. They're the prize. I'm the one trying to be enough. Whether you said it out loud or not, you lived like that was true. But when you both go no contact, the mechanics of that power dynamic suddenly break, not because anyone gave a speech, but because the fuel that kept it running, your pursuit, stops. At first, that will not feel empowering. It will feel like free fall because your nervous system has been trained to believe that your safety lives in them responding, them softening, them coming back. So when you stop trying and they don't rush in with reassurance, your whole body screams, "I've lost. I've been abandoned. I'm powerless." But if you stay in the silence just a little longer, something shifts. You start to realize that the game you thought you were losing, you're no longer playing. When you're not sending that late night, "Are you okay?" after they go cold. When you're not the first to ask, "Can we talk?" after conflict. When you no longer respond to distance by closing the gap for both of you. You're not the chaser anymore. You're simply a person who has stepped out of a role, and without you playing that role, their role is the one above. You stops existing too. They're no longer this larger than life figure whose every word determines your worth. They're just another human being sitting in their own silence, with their own patterns and problems, separate from you. Mutual no contact flattens the pedestal you built, because distance gives you what constant contact never could. Perspective. When you're not busy analyzing their messages, you have space to remember the whole picture, not just the highs. You remember the nights you cried alone, the times you begged for clarity, the way your body tensed when their name popped up, because you never knew if it was affection or withdrawal coming next. You start to see that you weren't standing below some emotionally superior person. You were tangled with someone who has wounds just as big as yours. They cope by running, you cope by chasing, and together you created a dance that made both of you feel powerful and powerless at different times, with no contact on both sides. That dance stops in the middle of the floor, and all that's left is two people and their coping mechanisms. No winner, no loser, just two nervous systems that reacted in opposite directions to the same fear. Will I be enough, and will I be safe? Once that pedestal crumbles, your healing takes a different shape. Instead of obsessing, "Why am I not enough for them?" you start asking, "Why did I make anyone this powerful over my sense of worth. It doesn't mean they didn't matter. It doesn't mean the love was fake. It means you finally see that they are not a judge handing out a life sentence on whether you're lovable. They're someone whose own fear made them show up inconsistently. You can absolutely hold them accountable for their behavior while still realizing their avoidance is not proof you were unworthy. It's proof they were overwhelmed. The same way you're chasing wasn't proof you were crazy. It was proof you were desperate to hold on to something that made you feel temporarily chosen. Mutual no contact separates identity from behavior. On both sides, they're not a god, you're not a Geiger, you're two humans who collided at your sorest points. The power dynamic also dissolves because choice becomes mutual again. In the old pattern, it always felt like everything depended on their decision to stay, leave, respond, commit, define. They were the one with the perceived power. Your entire emotional weather depended on whether they sent a sun emoji or a storm. But when silence sits on both ends, the spotlight shifts. It's not just, will they come back? It's also, if they do I actually want them back in my life in the same way? What would Zive require for this to be safe for me? Do I want to reopen this, knowing what it did to me? For the first time, you're not just waiting to be picked. You're considering whether you're still picking of them. And that question is where your power lies. You are not a character waiting for the main actor to re-enter the stage. You are a lead in your own story, deciding who gets a role in the next chapter. And here's the piece most people miss: the power dynamic inside them shifts too. When you stop chasing, they lose the quiet ego boost of knowing someone out there is emotionally revolving around them. They lose the comfort of thinking, I can always go back, they'll always answer. They are no longer the one with infinite options and infinite time. They become a person who has to confront that their actions have real consequences, that the safety of your presence wasn't guaranteed, and whether they use that realization to grow or to harden is their work, not yours. But make no mistake, your silence took them off the throne you once sat them on, not to punish them, but to finally see both of you at eye level, as equals, each responsible for your own healing, each responsible for your own choices. Mutual no contact doesn't just mean nobody's talking. It means the old hierarchy has been dismantled, and from here on, if any connection ever happens again, it has to be built between two humans standing side by side, not one begging from below and one dispensing affection from above. Silence feels empty, but it's not. It's doing diagnostic work on both of you, quietly, without permission, like an X-ray held up to the light that shows what's really broken and what's capable of healing. And that's what most people don't realize about mutual no contact. They think nothing is happening because there are no messages, no calls, no fights, no makeups. But actually more is happening in that silence than ever happened in the noise. Because now there's nowhere to hide, no drama to distract you, no long text to analyze. It's just you, them, and what each of you chooses to do with the space. When everything goes quiet, your patterns step forward. If your first instinct is to numb out with scrolling, overworking, rebounding, or constantly talk about them to anyone who will listen, that's information. It doesn't mean you're bad or broken. It means your system doesn't yet know how to sit with pain without reaching for something outside you to soothe it. And that awareness is priceless because you can't change a pattern you're still pretending you don't have. In the same way, if you find yourself slowly turning toward therapy, journaling, learning about attachment, spending time with people who feel safe, rebuilding the routines you abandoned during the relationship, that's also information. It's evidence that some part of you is choosing growth. Even while you're hurting, silence shows you which wolf you feed when the person you're obsessed with is no longer giving you moment-to-moment cues. The same X-ray is working on them, whether they like it or not. When you stop reaching out and they no longer have your emotional energy to lean on, their coping strategies light up very clearly. Do they immediately distract with someone new, jump on dating apps, surround themselves with noise, tell everyone who will listen a story about how you were too much? That's running from themselves in action, not because they're evil, But because their whole life they've used distance and deflection as armor, they don't know how to sit with regret or grief without feeling swallowed by shame, so they postpone it by filling the silence with stimulation. And yes, that might sting when you see it. It's easy to think, look how quickly they replaced me. But from the X-ray perspective, what you're seeing is not proof you were disposable. It's proof they don't know how to be with their own feelings without a distraction acting as anesthesia. On the other hand, if they're the type who withdraws even more and lives in denial, pretending nothing happened, that also gets revealed by the silence. Because with no one chasing them, their "I'm fine, I don't care" stance echoes back hollow, and eventually, if they're at all self-aware, they'll notice the recurring pattern. All the relationships that ended with the same quiet story. Someone who loved them walked away, and they did nothing but numb the aftermath. Silence also reveals who reaches for accountability, and you'll see that most in yourself. You begin by blaming them for everything. How they acted, how they hurt you, how unfair it was. And that blame is valid to a point, but if you're growing, the X-ray starts highlighting your side too. The moments you ignored your intuition, the times you lowered your standards, the way you chased when your body was begging you to rest. And you start asking harder questions. Not, what was wrong with me? But, why did I stay when I knew it was hurting? What wound in me thought this was the love I deserved? Those questions are accountability without self-hatred. They don't excuse their behavior. They empower you to make different choices in the future. And that shift from pure blame to honest self-inquiry is one of the clearest signs that the silence is maturing you instead of just scaring you. For them, accountability might look like small internal cracks in their usual story. They might remember how many times you said, "This hurts me," and realize they brushed it off. They might listen to a podcast or read something about avoidant attachment and feel uncomfortably seen. They might notice that even after you're gone, they still feel restless and dissatisfied in safer, more distant connections. And instead of blaming every partner as too much, they have a rare moment of honesty with themselves. I keep running, and I'm always alone in the end. Whether they do anything with that moment is not up to you. But the X-ray doesn't lie. The silence shows them exactly where their pattern leads, and it will keep showing them until they either choose to heal it or choose to stay stuck. What mutual no contact does, more than anything, is separate people into two groups without either of you saying a word: those who use the silence to distract and repeat, and those who use the silence to reflect and transform. And this applies to you too, not just them, because you can't control what they do with their X-ray, but you have enormous power over what you do with yours. You can spend the entire silent period watching their moves, reading into every little thing, or you can turn your gaze back to the person whose choices will actually shape your life from here on. You, your habits, your standards, your healing, your future relationships. When you understand that silence is not empty, it's diagnostic, you stop panicking that nothing is happening, and you start asking a better question. What is this quiet revealing about me that I need to see, so I never again confuse chaos with love or call my own self-abandonment devotion? There comes a point in this whole story where the universe quietly flips the question on you, and it's no longer, will they come back? Will they change? Will they finally see my worth? It becomes, will you? Go back to the version of yourself who abandoning your own heart to prove your love to someone who couldn't hold it. And that's the real test. Not whether their name ever lights up your phone again, but what you do with yourself if it does. Because you've lived this before, you know the pattern. They pull away, you panic, they go silent, you break, they reappear. Your nervous system lights up like a Christmas tree, and you rush back into the same dynamic, like the months of pain in between were just a bad dream. And every single time you did that, you didn't just return to them, you returned to the old you, the one who negotiated your needs down, who explained your feeling way, who accepted crumbs, and called it a feast because you were starving. So when I say what happens next is about whether you return to the old dynamic or to yourself, I'm asking you to notice who you become when the person you miss enters the room, do you shrink or do you stay standing? You already know what returning to the old dynamic feels like in your body. It starts with that first hit of relief. That, oh my God, they messaged. They do think of me. And then, without even realizing it, you slide right back into your role. You answer instantly even though you promised yourself you'd take time. You avoid saying how much you were hurt because you don't want to scare them off. You let them be vague about what they want so you don't risk losing the little you've just gained. And suddenly you're back in that space where their tone determines your mood. Their delay in replying sets off your anxiety. Their distance feels like a judgment on your worth. That is self-abandonment in action. Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to believe that staying connected to them is safer than staying connected to yourself. Even when all the evidence screams the opposite, returning to the old dynamic means you treat your own boundaries like negotiable suggestions instead of non-negotiable truths. It means you silence your intuition again, that quiet voice that says, this doesn't feel right, and you answer back with, shh, we'll lose them if we speak up. Returning to yourself, though, is a completely different experience. It doesn't mean you become cold or bitter or pretend you don't care. It means that if contact ever happens again, you bring the version of you that survived the silence into the conversation. You don't throw away everything you learned just because the person who triggered that growth has resurfaced. You remember the nights you held yourself while you cried. You remember the mornings you got out of bed when it felt pointless. You remember the progress your heart has made learning to beat without their constant stimulus. And you decide you will not rip all that healing open just to feel a few days of dopamine again. Returning to yourself sounds like, I can talk to you, but I won't pretend the past didn't happen. It sounds like, if we're going to explore anything, we need to address what broke me last time. It sounds like, I hear that you miss me, and I still care, but I won't step back into a dynamic that made me betray myself. The truth is, the old dynamic can't survive if you refuse to abandon you, because that dynamic was built on over-functioning and them under-functioning. You regulating both your nervous systems, you apologizing first, you being the consistent one while they were the unpredictable one. The moment you stop doing that, the relationship either evolves into something healthier or collapses under its own weight. And as scary as that sounds, it's actually freedom, because for once you're not contorting yourself to keep something alive that only breathes when you sacrifice your peace. When you choose yourself, you might still feel fear. You might still shake. You might still have nights where you long for the comfort of the familiar pattern, but you don't translate that longing into self-betrayal. You let the H move through without letting it move your boundaries. You allow your heart to feel and your feet to stay where your dignity lives. This is why I say the real test isn't whether they return. Plenty of avoidance circle back. That part is almost predictable. The real miracle is whether you keep returning to the same version of you who will accept anything just to not be alone, or whether you start returning to the version of you who is willing to be temporarily lonely in order to never again be consistently disrespected. One choice feels easier in the moment. You send the text, you get the hit, you feel that rush, and then the slow bleed begins again. The other choice feels brutal in the moment. You set a boundary, you say, no more of that. You risk them walking away, and then, quietly, something starts to repair inside you, your self-trust, your self-respect, your sense that you can rely on you. So when you think about what happens next, after mutual no contact, don't obsess over whether they will wake up, whether they will come back ready, whether this was enough to change them. Ask yourself a harder, more important question. If they do come back, am I willing to be the same person I was, or am I finally ready to act like someone whose heart is no longer available at the cost of their own soul? Because in the end, the story that will define your life is not whether an avoidant ever chose you. It's whether you finally, consistently, steadfastly choose yourself.